Load variability and price swings are compressing grid margins. Infrastructure used to be designed around predictability. Load curves followed seasonal patterns. Fuel prices fluctuated within known ranges. Grid operators could forecast peak demand with reasonable confidence. Industrial facilities could budget energy exposure as a cost variable, not a strategic risk. That operating environment has shifted. Energy volatility across price, load, supply mix, and extreme weather has become more persistent, more frequent, and less bounded. The stress is no longer confined to wholesale markets. It is propagating into physical infrastructure. Transformers running hotter, substations operating closer to capacity, backup systems cycling more often, and industrial loads adjusting in real time to avoid price spikes. The infrastructure is holding, for now, but it is being tested. Volatility is no longer episodic. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, EIA, U.S. wholesale electricity prices have shown wider intraday and seasonal swings over the past several years, driven by fuel price volatility, weather variability, and shifting generation portfolios. At the same time, the grid itself is becoming more dynamic. Increased penetration of intermittent generation requires greater balancing flexibility. Electrification is adding new load centers. Data centers are introducing concentrated, high-density demand. The result is not just price volatility, it is operational volatility. System operators must manage faster ramps, steeper peaks, and more localized congestion. Industrial facilities face unpredictable demand charges. Municipal utilities encounter tighter reserve margins. The infrastructure was largely designed for smoother load transitions. Physical assets feel the pressure. Energy volatility does not remain a financial abstraction. It expresses physically. Transformers experience thermal cycling as loads fluctuate. Peaker plants are dispatched more aggressively. Backup generators that once sat idle are used more frequently during extreme conditions. Voltage fluctuations stress sensitive industrial processes. The North American Electric Reliability Corporation has repeatedly highlighted tightening reserve margins in several regions, noting that extreme weather and demand variability are increasing the likelihood of operating alerts. Infrastructure that runs closer to its limits for longer periods accumulates stress, even if it does not fail. This kind of stress is subtle. It does not produce immediate outages. It produces shortened asset life, accelerated maintenance schedules, and higher replacement risk. Industrial operators are absorbing the shock. For energy-intensive industries, volatility has moved from background noise to operational constraint. Facilities now routinely adjust production schedules in response to price signals. Demand response participation has grown. On-site generation and storage are being evaluated not just for sustainability targets, but for price stability. Energy has become an operational variable that must be managed actively rather than budgeted passively. This introduces new infrastructure dependencies, automated controls, real-time monitoring, power quality management, and sometimes microgrid capability. It also increases the complexity of capital planning as facilities balance reliability, cost exposure, and emissions commitments simultaneously. The sustainability layer adds complexity. Decarbonization efforts are changing the structure of supply. The integration of renewable generation introduces variability that must be balanced elsewhere in the system. Storage and demand flexibility are scaling, but unevenly. Transmission constraints slow the movement of low-cost generation to high-demand regions. None of this is inherently destabilizing, but it increases the operational coordination required to maintain stability. Infrastructure that once depended on centralized, dispatchable generation must now operate within a more distributed, digitally managed environment. That requires new control systems, upgraded substations, advanced forecasting tools, and more resilient interconnections. The stress is not ideological, it is mechanical. Capital planning is lagging the volatility curve. Many infrastructure investment cycles were established under assumptions of gradual change. Assets were sized for predictable growth. Replacement schedules were based on steady utilization. Energy volatility disrupts those assumptions. When assets are used more intensively during peaks or cycled more frequently to balance variable generation, life cycle projections compress. When power quality becomes less stable, industrial facilities must invest in additional conditioning equipment. These shifts are often incremental until they are not. Capital budgets that were once sufficient for maintenance and modest upgrades begin to face competing priorities: resilience investments, efficiency upgrades, digital controls, and redundancy. The question becomes not whether volatility exists, but whether the infrastructure has been recalibrated to manage it. Grid resilience and corporate exposure are converging. Historically, grid stability was largely treated as a public utility responsibility. Corporate energy exposure centered on cost. That separation is narrowing. As infrastructure stress increases, corporate operators are taking more direct roles in managing energy risk through long-term contracts, on-site assets, storage, and digital optimization. But these strategies require physical infrastructure alignment. Backup capacity must be maintained. Interconnections must be upgraded. Protection systems must be validated under new load conditions. Energy volatility is turning infrastructure reliability into a shared responsibility. What this stress test reveals: energy systems are not failing at scale, but they are operating closer to design limits. Reserve margins are tighter, equipment is cycled more frequently, operators are making more real-time adjustments. That is what a stress test looks like. Stress tests reveal where margins are thin, where redundancy is insufficient, and where planning assumptions no longer match reality. Energy volatility is not a temporary disruption. It is a condition of the modern grid. Infrastructure that adapts through flexibility, monitoring, redundancy, and smarter capital sequencing will absorb it. Infrastructure that does not will accumulate silent risk until volatility turns into constraint. You've been listening to Sustainability Soundbites by Environment and Energy Leader. For partnership opportunities, please reach out to our team.